Thank you, a wonderful, wonderful audience. I just have to say, this is my Seinfeld impression, and it's really bad. The cows were jumping over the...
Hey, buddy. Got any milk? It's alright. I'll just take this. Alright, see ya.
Where did that milk come from? Hello and welcome to These Pretzels Are Making Me Thirsty episode of On Screen. I'm your host, Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey about nothing through film and television. So today we're talking about one of the classic comedy sitcoms, whatever you want to call it, on television of all time. And to do that, I brought along a special guest, a big fan of the show. The special guest this week is Managing Editor Alex Weidner. Alex, thanks for joining me.
I'm happy to be here.
The show we're talking about this week is, of course, Seinfeld, the show about nothing, supposedly, created by Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David back in the old 90s. Alex, how did you first get into Seinfeld?
Well, like you and everyone else in our generation, our age, grew up in the 90s. And my parents would always have, old sitcoms on TV. Friends was one of them. Seinfeld was another one. And so it was always on. So, for my whole life, I've seen, Seinfeld reruns over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. My dad would always have it on. It was one of his favorite shows of all time. And we had the DVD box set, so I would just watch those going to bed because I just knew them by heart. And we would just sit and watch the Seinfeld reruns. Usually on TBS is where we would watch when they were in syndication. But it's a show that is basically one of the things that I remember growing up with besides like the regular kid show stuff. Seinfeld was probably the first adult thing I remember enjoying immensely. And it's definitely an adult show. There's a lot of things that it would be hard to get away with nowadays on television, a lot of taboo subjects. What do you think of Seinfeld trying to push the edge on a lot of these topics?
I think Seinfeld can be family friendly. And, there's moments that are a little bit more, inappropriate and probably, venture out into the annals of TV. But they definitely they do it in an intelligent way.
Yeah.
And like when you think about, a group of adults the age of, that group, Jerry and Elaine and George and Kramer, people their age, they'd probably be, cussing a lot more than they are in the show.
Oh, absolutely.
So like the only time they really like go into, deep cussing, like with the F word, they bleep it, and it's this whole big thing. Like, why would you talk like that?
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting take on that, because you can see like where like they work around not being able to cuss on TV.
Yeah.
And things they can and can't say.
Absolutely. That was in the frozen yogurt episode, I think.
Yeah,
right?
frozen yogurt.
And that is a really interesting point. They do kind of delve around things that are still a little too raunchy being one word that you could use, but they're tough for TV. But let's get into the characters. You have Jerry Seinfeld, of course, the lead. He basically plays a fictionalized version of himself. He's a stand-up comedian living in New York City, and he has a next-door neighbor named Kramer, whose first name at first is mysterious, and nobody knows that. They just know him by his last name. But it's eventually revealed to be the very appropriately named Cosmo Kramer. And he's the zany next-door neighbor that is all about physicality and stuff like that. And then you have Elaine Bennis, who is Jerry's ex-girlfriend, who becomes close friends with Jerry and the gang. And then you have George Costanza, probably the worst human being on the face of the planet until It's Always Sunny came to television. Do you have a favorite character that really jumps out at you, Alex?
Oh, man, that's a hard question. Everyone loves, Kramer.
Yeah.
Because he's so ridiculous, and the physical acting and his weird outfits and his schemes. He's probably at the top for me, just the way he bursts in the room and, the audience laughs and just the weird stuff he gets into. I think he's probably at the top. I think George is up there because he's funny and he's terrible, but like you can almost relate to him. Like he's doing the stuff because it's just the way he is.
Absolutely.
Like you can tell he's terrible in social situations and he just comes off as this awful person a lot of the time. But
And it's really funny because George, who's played by Jason Alexander, is based off of co-creator Larry David. So it's really strange that this character that everybody sees as this lecherous, scheming little man is based off of one of the creators.
yeah,
And he is hilarious. I think Jason Alexander is definitely underrated as an actor in this performance because you make him believe that he is this depraved and that he really believes everything he's saying.
definitely.
Like, he has lines like, "It's not a lie if you believe it." Like, that just tells you all you need to know about him.
Yeah, and I think the fashion of the show is really, a timeless thing. Like,
It is.
Jerry with his sneakers.
Yep.
Like, every episode he's got, fresh white sneakers on, and, there's the episode where he gets them cleaned and he loses them.
That he has to wear the cowboy boots.
Yeah.
"Hey, cowboy, where's your horse?"
Jason Alexander, George with his sweaters and
Yep.
stuff like that. And then Kramer with his ridiculous cabana shirts and
Yeah.
floods that he wears.
And Elaine with those signature shoes, the Botticellis.
Yeah.
Those shoes are classic. They're iconic, I would say.
And the hair.
Oh, her hair.
Everyone's hair,
Absolutely. It was definitely the 90s.
Yeah.
It was definitely the 90s. And this is a show that really grew into something that became almost a cultural phenomenon. Like, there's phrases that went into the public pop culture references.
Talking about, doing this podcast, I was thinking about this. There is a Seinfeld reference for almost every situation you could be in.
Absolutely.
I've discovered that over the last few years. People say something and I'll say something back and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "It's a Seinfeld reference." Like,
yeah.
Everything has a Seinfeld reference.
Every time my dad and I are in a room with somebody, we will 10 times out of 10, we will reference Seinfeld. Like, somebody says something that's really disgusting, and one of us will go, "That's perverse," which Frank Costanza says at the dinner with the Rosses. And like that, like, it's like little things like that, like small little lines that, like, you think those are really obscure references. They just, like, stick with you because the performances of everybody are just so on the ball. And, like, even the supporting cast, like Jerry's parents, George's parents, Newman, like, they're all such wacky and zany characters that you really love to watch because they're just so out there, but yet kind of rooted in reality.
Right. And I think, like, going back to, how this show has been, culturally significant. I mean, you've got, like, references to things that happened at the time, like when Kramer's driving the Ford Bronco at the low-speed chase.
Yep.
The lawyer, Jackie Childs.
Yeah, as a Johnny Cochran reference.
The bra don't fit, you must have quit, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. They even have, like, a full reenactment of a scene from JFK, which was a movie that just came out.
Yeah.
And just, like, they throw in these references that you might not get now watching them on Hulu, but they're still kind of funny. Like, they still make them really, really resonate with you, even if you haven't seen the material they're based off of.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of like a couple episodes that they really step out to you, what are some of them?
Oh, man. I don't even, like, I watched the whole series through a few weeks ago on Hulu. I don't even see it as, like, you can say this episode was great, this episode was great. I see it in, like, little bits here and there. Like, you get the soup Nazi, you've got the party in Tim Watley's apartment.
Jerry, I didn't think you'd show.
The what was the bread? The loaf,
the marble rye.
The marble rye.
Yep.
The Kramer's schemes with, like, the bottle deposit scheme.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, all the little different big moments in each episode are what stand out to me, not just a whole episode. And in watching the series through from start to finish, I realize I have seen every episode at least once in my life on rerun somehow.
Yeah.
It's 171 episodes of this show. I've seen every single
just
episode.
Absorbed it through, like, osmosis.
Yeah. I sit down and watch it. I'm like, I've already seen this one. Oh, yeah. Years ago.
And you just start quoting a line.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yep, I remember this now.
I mean, I think if I had to pick an episode that really, like, stands out and I'm like, I got to see it, I got to watch it, it's funny, it's relevant, and I always quote it, I think the Festivus episode.
Oh,
because when I was in high school, there was a substitute teacher who was, like, a long-term sub, like, for a bunch of different teachers throughout the years. And he would always joke about Festivus. And one year, finally, he brought in an aluminum pole, set it up in the classroom he was in, and made his students watch the episode. And it was just hilarious.
That's awesome.
So every year since then, my other friend has handed out Festivus cards.
That's really cool.
So every year on December 23rd, I always think, Happy Festivus.
That is awesome. And I do love that episode. I especially love when George is giving out cards like that. A donation in your name has been made to the Human Fund.
Yeah, money for people.
Money for people.
I also think one of my favorite scenes, like building to a scene that kind of, works up, is the Amazing Technicolor coat episode where Kramer, he gets the coat.
Yep.
He gets the cane. He gets the hat. And he's just walking down the street. That whole build-up is just perfect from the beginning of the episode. And, they introduce, that, she has this coat in her possession. She can, access it for him. And there's the car park thing going on. And there's something sketchy there. And then the cane comes into his hands. She's like, "You want it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then the hat. I think everything about that is just perfect.
Yeah.
Up until that final scene when the cop comes up.
I'm not a pimp. One scene that I think is very similar to that, where it's the build up to the episode. It's when George is basically a marine biologist for his one girl, and Kramer's at the beach hitting golf balls, and you're thinking how are these gonna? And then at the very end, that big monologue that Jason Alexander has about having to save the beached whale, and it's just comedy gold, and the audience is eating it up. Yeah. And this is one series that I don't mind a studio audience, because usually a laugh track I'm getting well, I'm glad that you're telling me when to laugh, but you feel like you're in on it with them. You feel like you're with the audience instead of being told this is when you laugh, because you have different reactions. For instance, I remember in the puffy shirt episode where the homeless people were wearing the puffy shirt. You could hear one audience member going, "Oh my God!" And it's things like that make me okay, this is a real audience watching this, and I'm enjoying it with them.
Yeah.
I know that there is one thing about the series that sticks in your craw, if you will, that you feel like they went a little too far. And what is that?
The moment for me that really kicks it off, this show is ridiculous, and it jumped the shark, as we would say in TV, is when George is engaged to Susan. He doesn't want to go through with it. He's having second thoughts, and then she licks the envelopes to send out the invitations, and she dies.
Yep.
She just dies, and then they all crack a joke about it and go on with their lives.
Kramer goes, "Poor Lily."
And then it's just. How do you write that into a show? This character dies. They were engaged. They were going to be married, and then they just kill her in one episode.
Yeah.
And then they just forget about it. And a few episodes later, a few seasons later, they'll bring back her parents.
You have the Susan Ross Foundation,
played by
Grace Zabriskie and Warren Frost.
Yeah,
from
who were
Twin
both
Peaks.
in Twin Peaks as different characters. Weird to see them in this show because their characters are so different. She's an alcoholic and he's just a rude, angry old man.
Yeah.
But they bring them back, and they bring back the relationship between them and George, and they're like, "We hate you, George."
Yeah.
But there's no remorse in these characters for the fact that she died.
I like to call the Seinfeld gang the proto Always Sunny gang, because at the start of the series they're pretty normal New Yorkers, they're just going around. But by the end of the series they're watching some guy get mugged, and they're laughing about it and making fun of him.
Yeah. So, it just blows my mind. It's a show about nothing. That's where it starts. And I loved the mundane level of the show in the beginning, and how it was just so there was nothing going on. They're just arguing about stupid things.
There's an episode they're just sitting in a Chinese restaurant waiting for their order.
Yeah, it's talking. Just funny, and it's just so normal. And then when they start to introduce things like that, or when George goes to Cuba to talk to Castro, just the weird over the top stuff really makes the show. I mean, it's still good, and I still appreciate it. It just makes it just less what you think of Seinfeld as.
Yeah. Well, there's episodes where Kramer gets a rooster and ends up having a cockfighting rooster named Little Jerry.
Yeah, these people are criminals at this point.
And they're I don't know if you remember the oil slick bladder system where they fill up a rubber ball with the ball of oil,
the bladder.
It's just crazy.
Hello.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Jared's gonna be going away for a while.
I mean, I'm looking at the episode list to kind of get an idea of which is what's going on in each episode. I think a Seinfeld character that's underrated that I always think about is Putty, David Putty. I mean, Patrick Warburton is so funny.
I love the episode where they're going to a New Jersey Devils hockey game,
and he paints his face.
He's painting my face. And like the scene, there's a scene where like him and Elaine are in an airport and they're like getting on a plane and like he's just staring at the seat and Elaine's like, do you want something to read? He's like, nah, I'm good. He's just looking at the plane and
I'm feeling Arby's.
like David, no, it's Patrick Warburton. Does such a great job with that character.
Yeah.
And it's great that he's still getting some pretty good roles. Like he's in Family Guy. He's a regular Family Guy. So
everything about, I mean, his character is so funny. I mean, he becomes a religious at that one point. the fur coat thing. You know, they jump the shark with, you know, killing Susan. But then when you think about like other ridiculous things, season 9 is like...
Season 9 is definitely...
I feel like season 9 is always the make or break it season for a lot of shows. Like, They either you love season 9 and it continues, or season 9 is the end and it's bad.
Yeah.
And the Merv Griffin show episode.
Oh, where he has the whole set.
He has the whole Merv Griffin set. That doesn't even make sense.
No. Well, there's the episode where there's the giant Kenny Rogers roaster sign outside, and then they switch apartments, and Jerry starts acting like Kramer, and Kramer starts acting like Jerry.
Yeah.
It's like it gets weird. It definitely does.
Absolutely.
But like season 4 and season 3 are just almost perfect, I would say. Season 4 has the pilot thing where Jerry's got an NBC pilot, and like there's like a whole through line of that, and Crazy Joe Davola, and it's some really cool stuff. And it's definitely a show that if you want, you could just pick any random episode and just dive right in.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that really adds to the greatness of the show.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you know the characters. No matter what episode you're going into, you're in a room with these 4 characters and you're just having a conversation.
I agree.
And it's a great show. And if you haven't checked it out, everybody at home, definitely do yourself a favor. Pick up a Hulu subscription. Go watch Seinfeld. It's a fun show.
Or just turn on TBS any day of the week and you'll probably find
it. You will definitely find a rerun. There's not really any like all out like terrible episode. I mean, there are some that are like the Puerto Rican Day Parade one is
that one's not too bad.
It's okay. And there's a couple where it's a little iffy, like Jerry and George like basically drug a girl so that they could play with her.
Yeah, they get her drunk
toys.
on boxed wine.
Yeah,
to play with the toys. That was weird.
That was not great. So there's some stuff that doesn't quite translate to today's.
Yeah,
but besides that, it still holds up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely. It's, you know, I always think about old shows and old movies, like they don't age well. You know, Blazing Saddles, Austin Powers, Wayne's World, like comedy doesn't always age well. But I think Seinfeld does. You know, I mean, you get like, not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, you know, the quotes about very political or social, very relevant things that, you know, they're not bad and they don't really come off as terrible.
Yeah, it's not like they're being overly. Terrible towards a certain creed or code or anything like that. They're coming at it from a very like honest and very funny way, and I think that really helps. And comedy definitely is the thing that ages the worst out of any genre.
But I think they definitely hit the nail on the head with Seinfeld, and it has aged gracefully.
I believe so.
Seinfeld himself might not have, but I think the show has.
Hey, he's doing well with comedians in cars getting coffee.
Yeah.
That's fun too. Yeah, and he's rich, so.
I think maybe throw out a spoiler alert, so if you haven't watched the series...
I mean, you already spoiled
who
Susan
hasn't.
died.
Yeah.
So.
If anyone hasn't seen the series, you shouldn't even be watching this or listening to this at this point. But the finale was the only episode that it took me years to ever see, because it's the only one, I guess, that isn't syndicated.
Huh.
I think I heard that somewhere. It's not a syndicated episode, so it's hard to find it. I finally saw it years ago, and then I, of course, watched it this time. It's ridiculous. Like, I mean, the whole series goes on 9 seasons of them just doing crazy things.
Yeah.
You know, breaking the law and stuff like that. And then they get to the end, and then they put them in jail.
Yeah. It's almost like they get to like the heaven's pearly gates, and then they're being read a list of all of their sins and their grievances. And a lot of people don't like the finale. They're not a fan that they go to jail. But I kind of like it. I think it's a good way to sum up how terrible these people have become. And like they end the show with a conversation that they had at the very beginning about like missing a button, I think. And I think it's a nice way to wrap things up in that while they are being punished for their misdeeds, like they're still going through with the same routine that they've always been. I like the finale. It's a good way to bring back all these different people that we've seen throughout
Yeah.
the course of the show, and it's good. I like it.
Yeah.
So that's going to be it for this week's episode of On Screen. If you have any ideas for future topics, let me know. I would love to cover anything that you'd like me to cover. And as always, until next time,
Here's to feeling good
all the time. Did you hear about the one about the dyslexic devil worshiper? He sold his soul to Santa. Okay. Well, the sky it was blue, and